Hello, once again, everybody. A pleasure to be talking with Matt Roberts once again. Matt, at the Ohio State University's Outlook and Policy Conference well, it's an annual event. We like to talk with you every time we get a chance, but this special event, you get to prognosticate a little bit, look ahead and say to all of our viewers what exactly is going to be coming down the road as far as price for the commodities that they're growing or will be growing. Let's take a look at 2014 and where does it look like prices will be going?
Well, Gary, I think the general consensus, and I share this, is that prices are headed lower, both for the old crop, the crop that we've just finished harvesting, as well as the 2014, the crop that we'll plant and harvest in 2014. The idea is probably we will see prices continue to fall. The reality is that the last 4 years we've seen relatively disappointing yields, and so that has kept prices relatively high, it's kept supplies low, but we can't expect to have bad years year after year after year. We'll expect to have a normal year at some point. That's why it's called normal. We look even at this year. Right now, the market probably expects that yields are probably coming in at 162 is, I believe, the general market forecast. That's not that bad of a year, and we've already seen prices fall. If we follow this up with another 164, 165 average yield in 2014, I think we'll be looking at harvest futures prices in a 360 to 375 range. And that's a very different economic scenario than what we've had the last 5 or 6 years. I think as we go through the year and we move towards that, that'll also continue to pressure old crop. A lot of farmers are holding on to their old crop because they remember these prices we had just a few months ago. And I worry that come May, come June, as prices have not recovered, there may be a rush to go ahead and market grain, which is going to quickly depress those prices. So unfortunately, it's not a terribly rosy outlook as we look over the next year.
Well, so many things play into the price of the various the grain market. Of course, with ethanol helping drive price. How is that going to be looking as far as this coming year?
Well, by my analysis over the last 12 years, ethanol was the number 2 driver of grain prices globally. Number 1 was Chinese demand for oilseeds. Number 2 was ethanol. The best case scenario right now is that ethanol demand is flat in 2014. What we see, though, is the EPA has actually proposed a reduction in the renewable fuel standard. Now, that's a floor. It's not a ceiling, but a reduction in the mandated gallons to be consumed from 14.4 billion gallons to approximately 13 billion gallons. It's a long story. I personally don't think they have the legislative authority to do so, but we don't have time to go into that. But if that does stand, it will not create that large of a cut in ethanol consumption. We've consistently produced more ethanol than we were required to for the last 7 years, but it will almost certainly mean we will produce less than we would otherwise. So and it just adds to this overall bearish feeling. Okay, this is again, another source of demand that we've had for the last decade that's just going away, if not reversing. And so I think that's really, whether or not in 2014 itself it really undercuts demand, it changes the tone.
When we take a look at countries around the world, the global market, we have to look at the production in countries like Brazil, what's happening in China, around the world, and what does that look like right now?
Well, right now, and again, from a big picture standpoint, I would argue the most important area to be looking at right now is really the former Soviet Union, the countries around the Black Sea. Over the past 12 years, the past 6 years, those high prices we've seen in grains, again, driven by very strong global demand, those high prices have provided the incentive to rapidly expand farms and bring a lot of land. A lot of the land in the former Soviet Union was fallow from the early 90s up for 10, 12 years due to the economic collapse of the Soviet Union. Now with these high prices, suddenly $6 corn provides a lot of money to build infrastructure and maybe to grease the palms of a lot of petty officials that might have stood in the way of that land coming in. In fact, just a few months ago, I was speaking to a farm manager. He runs a farm in the Ukraine that that is 125,000 hectares. Not 125,000 acres, but 125,000 hectares. So that's over 300,000 acres. None of this was in production 5 years ago. And so this is the sort of thing. So we look globally, these high prices, great for us in agriculture in the United States, but it has provided the way for global production to increase as well.
So it's cyclical, I guess, is the key word from year to year to year.
Well, the old saying, there's no better cure for high prices than high prices, and we're seeing that right now. We're seeing high prices ration demand, and they increase supply. And those high prices we've had the last 5 years, it takes a few years for supply to really ramp up in agriculture, but we're seeing that now.
Let me ask you, and I'm going to go back in time, how true is this statement? And this was something that former Ag Secretary Earl Butz told a Dayton, Ohio audience, 25, 30 years ago maybe. He said that we are one major natural disaster away from famine in some part of the world.
Well, I think there certainly is truth there, but the reality is now versus 25 years ago, one of the things that has changed is our logistics have gotten a lot better. Our information about the world has gotten better. And so on one hand, and we see this in 07, 08, a major natural disaster that was 2 years of successive drought in Australia, very devastating drought in Australia, significant crop losses also in Europe, and we did see some food shortages. What I would argue now, the primary difference now versus 25 years ago, we're more aware of the food shortages that persist day to day, and it remains, as many economists have written, the biggest thing causing famine in the world today is not food shortages. Instead, it's governmental ineptitude or governmental corruption. And while I don't disagree with Butz's quote, I think that when we look at the grand history of the 20th century in food security, we see that government ineptitude and corruption have killed many more people than famine.
And of course, farmer efficiency, especially in this country, has just gone off the charts.
Oh, it's amazing to look at the amount of food that's produced, how fast that's increased, and in relative terms, the extent to which we've reduced the inputs. We've reduced the amount of fertilizer per bushel grown in corn and soybeans, and the efficiency that we can produce everything with today in the agriculture is amazing, and it's easy to lose the fact that right now there's never been a time in history where a smaller percentage of the world's population is starving. We actually have, in proportional terms, greater food security than we ever have, and much greater in pure number terms than we've had at any time in the last 25 or 30 years.
Well, Matt, let's go to where the rubber meets the road. As far as what Ohio farmers can look for next year, the 2014 crop, cash prices, what might the various crops entail?
I think that in old crop, we talk about old crop, I expect to see prices continue to go further down. I think that we will see cash bids this summer in the 380 area, 375 to 380 area. When we talk about new crop, I believe new crop 14 in corn, I would expect to see cash bids of 350 or lower at harvest, if not even down to 330, 340 at harvest. When we talk about soybeans, I would expect to see at harvest in 2014, I think a $10 cash bid would not surprise me. I'm not yet ready to say below $10 on the cash basis. I think there's a lot better fundamental scenario for the soy complex than there is the corn complex. The real question is going to be what happens to acreage allocation between corn and soybeans over the next 3 months. How many acres will shift from corn into soybeans? We will lose corn acres in 14 versus 13. The real question is how many acres and where will they go?
So are you saying there's going to be some hedge opportunities?
There already are hedging opportunities. I think a lot of farmers right now are very reluctant to sell their 13 crop because they remember those prices we had even 6 months ago. I think this is going to turn out to be a real mistake. I believe there will be opportunities in basis, but if I have corn that I'm storing right now, I would very much have it hedged. I probably would have at least part of my soybeans hedged as well. I'd like to see at least 50% of those hedged, but corn, I think there's a lot of downside here. This December report, certainly as we go into that, if nothing else, taking out some calls for 1, 2, 3 days ahead of that December report. If that comes out at a 162 or 163 or 164 number, all very possible, we could see a 30-cent break overnight in those corn prices.
So there you have it from Matt Roberts. Matt, it's always a pleasure. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
And stay with us. We'll return right after this.